Le cheval plaît beaucoup, hein. C'est un vecteur de communication extraordinaire.
Avant d'être un cavalier, c'était important d'être un horseman.
Always put the horse before the personal ambitions.
Vraiment un cheval incroyable.
Voilà quelqu'un qui est champion olympique et qui n'est pas ordinaire.
Se remettre en question et peut se servir des défaites pour être meilleur après.
Ce feeling, je l'ai eu directement avec Caleb.
On fait du haut niveau, il y a le côté financier, c'est comme ça.
Aller en compétition parce qu'il est bon, pas parce qu'il paye une table.
Moi, je veux pas courir mes chevaux pour l'argent.
If you can do it in a way that doesn't take too much out of your horses.
Quand on voit l'évolution en 10 ans de temps, qu'est-ce que ça va être dans 10 ans?
Pouvoir motiver les jeunes à aller au bout de leurs rêves.
Forme de très très bons compétiteurs. Je ne vais pas dire que ça forme des hommes de chevaux.
Pour moi, les bons moments, ils sont à venir.
Aujourd'hui, réussir sa vie, c'est avoir la vie que l'on souhaite.
Let's go back to Wellington. This conversation was recorded during our Welly trip last January. After recording episodes with Beezie Madden, Farrington and Katie Prudent, here is another iconic name in American equestrianism that couldn't be ignored. With 5 Olympic medals from 6 participations, McLain Ward is one of the most successful riders on the American continent. This year, he celebrates his 50th birthday and he completes his 35th season at the highest level of show jumping. That's impressive. But what struck us most when we recorded this episode was his vision and philosophy. McLain thinks, analyses, studies, organises. Nothing is ever left to chance, and each performance seems to be more a harvest than a result, the fruit of a well-defined process. Relying on a well-oiled system, he makes sure he maintains his position season after season, deadline after deadline. As you will see from this episode, McLain Ward is a top-level athlete in every sense of the word. Are you ready, McLain?
I'm ready.
Hello, McLain. Thank you so much for welcoming us here. So we are in the middle of the barn. So maybe the people listening to this episode will hear the sound of the horses, the noise and everything, but that's just so great.
Part of the life.
That's life. McLain, I'm going to introduce you and then I'll ask you to tell us the story of yours. So you are an American show jumper, one of the most successful ever. You participated in 6 Olympic Games, 5 medals, so that's quite a great ratio. So you were gold medal with the team in Athens 2004. You were gold medal with the team with Beezie, Lara and Will Simpson in Beijing 2008. You also won the silver team with Azure in Rio and Tokyo as well, silver team. And last year, at the Paris Olympic, you won the gold silver again with Carl Cook, Beezie and Laura Kraut. This is obviously very impressive list. And we can only wonder how you have become such a successful and long-lasting athletes, because there's no many people on the circuit that have so many successes as you have. So maybe before we start, we will ask you to tell the story of yours, to tell us how this all started. Where do you come from? What was your childhood like? And how did you become the athlete you are today? And I know that's quite a long story you have to tell.
Yeah, thank you for the great compliments. Unfortunately, these are all things behind us and we need to keep the vision on the future. And it has, all of those accomplishments have a great deal to do with obviously the incredible horses that I was fortunate enough to get to compete with and the incredible group of people that have always surrounded me. My story started, both of my parents were in this sport and in this business. My father was quite a successful Grand Prix rider, and my mother was a horse trainer and coach. So I was born into the sport. I was born at a farm. We lived above the stable in New York. This was our life. So it became pretty easy to get exposure and to start riding. and it's kind of a funny side story that I've told many times, but I wasn't very talented in the beginning. I didn't show a lot of promise when I was riding ponies, even to the point where some colleagues of my father were very concerned to let my father know that I wasn't very talented, because he was quite a hard-driving man and pretty strong personality, and they knew that it would be probably pretty combative if his son wasn't very good at something he was pushing him to do. But luckily, I got on horses. Things started to change. I showed a bit more promise. And my career started to take off in my early teens. And our story is really unique because the team of people around me, probably the most known, Lee and Erica McKeever. Lee is here in the stable with us today. His wife is at home at our place in New York. We're there from the beginning. 14 years old, we were kind of started to do it. They worked for my father. And they were really also great at what they did and had great passion. And so we started on that journey pretty early on. And we learned together. We made mistakes together. We grew together and ultimately had some great success together. And we've had some disappointing, challenging moments, a lot of them as well. I think it's hard to pinpoint one reason why something comes together. I do subscribe to the philosophy as you get to know people and you're around people, you find out why they are where they are, and that's good or bad. And I think we're a group of people who have a vision. Certainly, I always had an idea of where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do in the sport from my teen years on. I knew I wanted to try to be one of the best in the world. I had a vision of what I wanted to build and how I thought it would look. And then, you surround yourself with really good people who are really experts at what they do, because in an ever-growing, more complicated world, and our sports and our businesses also are growing more complicated, you cannot do everything yourself. It's not a one-man show. You need to surround yourself with the best people. And some of those relationships come by chance interaction, and some you seek out. And you also have to be willing to decide when something isn't right for your life and your career, and not be afraid to move away from that in a positive direction. And that's also difficult at times. But I was lucky. I fell into relationships that were incredibly beneficial to me personally and supportive of me personally, and then obviously professionally. Also extending that to different personalities and professionals in Europe who wanted to align themselves with us and where we were going, what we were wanting to do, and help us have access to some of the best horses. And I would also say sponsors and supporters, people that bought into the goals that we were seeking and the level of excellence that we were trying to reach, and they wanted to be part of that, and we were very grateful for them to be behind us. And so I had access to better and better horses, and we started to win, and winning always breeds confidence and makes you want to go to the next step and push the envelope. I would say what I bring to the table personally is, that vision of where we're going to go, and my personality is one that it's never enough. It's never good enough. I'm certainly don't become complacent. And we kind of have a running joke in our stable that the more we win, the more difficult I can be, because I'm always afraid we're going to fall behind, or we're going to get content. So I drive harder in that moment, and that's infectious. At the same time, it's also quite difficult to deal with. So you have to find that balance. And then as your families grow, not only the people around you but yourself, and you have relationships and children, you got to incorporate all of those different dynamics into it. And at some point, you've done hard enough work and you've made enough right decisions, though you'll be checkered by incredibly difficult moments, and we've had plenty of them. We've had a lot of missteps, but with a lot of support, we've figured out how to navigate those missteps and turn them into benefits. And then, one day you wake up and you look back and you've had a nice career.
So, McLain, your father was a top-level rider. Was it an option for you to make a career out of this sport? Did you have a choice?
You always have a choice. I never believe you don't have a choice. For sure, we're all pressured in different directions. That's life. We all have different aspects of our upbringings that are unique, with benefits and drawbacks, and challenges. And you can choose to use those benefits and those, drawbacks or challenges to propel you in a certain direction, or to be an excuse not to go anywhere. I think in the end, though, I'm not going to say that I don't have moments that I have been discouraged, but normally I can channel the energy in due time in the right direction. My situation was interesting because when I was 5, my parents were divorced. My father was a Grand Prix rider on tour, and to have a relationship with my dad, I kind of had to start to get engaged in the horses, because not that there was anything done wrong, but he was traveling, he was on the road, he was competing. And if I wanted to be with him, I had to go to the show, so to speak. So that probably encouraged me a little bit because I wanted that relationship. And then it grew from there. But I would say early teens, I knew that this is what I wanted to do for a variety of reasons. And again, I don't think it's unique. I think we all have it in our upbringings. You come to your place to seek something or to be ambitious about a certain career because of those experiences you had. And for a long time, because of different family issues, I probably was driven by the fact that I wanted to do well for my parents. I wanted to do well for my father in particular. I wanted to do well at the sport for a variety of internal pressures. And I've always had to work at, doing it for my own satisfaction. And I think, luckily, at this point in my career, I'm there more than ever before. So that's a nice place to be in. But that was always a challenge for me.
Have there been people along your way that helped you, that influenced your riding, that helped you grow in the career apart from your father? But have you met people along your way, like trainers, like other riders, who really shaped the career you have today?
Without question, absolutely. Many, too many to mention in 10 hours of interviews. Growing up in the sport, I had access to relationships not only from a coaching point of view, but also from a personal interaction point of view with the best in the sport. My father was quite successful and was one of the first big horse dealers in the United States, bringing horses from Europe. So very early on, I had exposure to not only the best American riders and trainers, but also Europeans. And I was the beginning of what I say is a crossover generation in our sport. Up until probably the 1970s, the sport of show jumping and equestrian, all disciplines, was very country oriented. The French rode a certain way, the Italians rode a certain way, the Germans rode a certain way, the Americans rode a certain way. And starting in the 70s, when travel and access to information started to really open up with technology, you started to see the beginning of a crossover. European bred horses for show jumping were starting to come to the United States for business, for sale. Riders were traveling abroad easier to see and be exposed to different styles, and the sport was becoming more worldly. And what that was the beginning of is what I would say you see as kind of a universal style and a way of training that when you really look at the top of the sport, the Germans can ride in a forward seat. The forward seat French can sit down in the saddle now and put the horse together. The best can do all of those things, and they've blended them to come up with what's not only probably the most successful way of riding and training, but to be able to vary that depending on the type of horse they're riding and the characteristics of that horse. Personally, my exposure to great coaches very early on, which was different than my father, but he was always very open-minded to these type of teachings and education. My dad was a blue-collar background, taught himself, self-taught how to ride, really started on the wrong side of the track, so to speak, but was smart and was actually a very good horseman and very intuitive to figure out how to do things better, and incredibly open-minded to particularly like the classic cavalry system coming to the United States. Bert Denemethey, who was kind of the first huge influences here in the United States on correct riding, position, discipline, a military-esque, way of doing things. And then when you combine that with a more free-flowing, natural horsemen, kind of, everyday horse people here in the United States, it produced quite a strong way of doing things. My dad was very positive about that, and I've said very often in my early education, typically the blue-collar horse people were very closed door to this concept of the United States equestrian team and the Olympic movement. And my dad saw that was where the sport was going to go, and he wasn't closed-minded to it. So my exposure was to be very open-minded, to be that was the ultimate goal as an athlete. Then beyond that, like I said, I've mentioned the McKeevers, who have been an integral part of my career and our success. And then, just everybody that I've been able to interact with, there's lessons to be learned. Some of those lessons are what not to do and where you don't want to go and what you don't want to be. And I can't say I've always made the right choices on that. I certainly haven't, but I've tried to. I've gotten up every day and tried to follow the people in the sport that I have great admiration for in different aspects. People like Paul Schockmuller and Francois Matty, the way they structured a business and grew the sport and grew it economically, and were able to produce large numbers of top horses and create a market. Different people like Katie Prudent and Conrad Homfeld in my country, or Michael Matz, who really perfected the art of riding and competing. Then there have been many other examples about how to run a stable, and like you see here, we have a really family-oriented operation. People come here for long periods of time, and even if they go on to do something else in life and take the next step, I think for the most part they feel that they were part of something that made a difference in their life, most importantly. And then we were chasing something, and we were working very hard for something together as a team and a family that inspired people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what is sport? Sport is the conflict of life in an arena. It's a little bit safer in theory, but it gives that drama, right? It gives the drama. And for people to be part of those pursuits and have responsibility and acknowledgement, I think you're invested, and it should change your life. And obviously for me, it's changed my life. Listen, I don't have false humility. I believe I've created an idea and a set of goals that we're going to go after. And then, I've been very lucky that a lot of people have believed in those things and wanted to be part of it.
You talked about being a horseman. What is for you horseman? What is horsemanship? How can you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of an abstract idea, and I think there's a lot of different definitions of it, and I think we struggle as a sport and an industry as we've grown and it's become very commercial, and we can't do everything to really understand that. I don't think I'm a brilliant horseman from the point of view of knowing the horse as well as my father knew the horses, or knew the real details about the horse. I would say I'm a very good horseman manager. I come up with an idea, I come up with a game plan, I come up with a structure, and then I've always tried to surround myself with people who I think are really brilliant at certain aspects that are needed to be, we use the term horseman, but needed to have a horsemanship-oriented sport operation. And I look to other sports teams, right? There was a time when in American baseball, for example, the coach actually played. He picked the players. He came up with the workout routine. He came out with the recovery concepts, the training thing. He was halfway the doctor, psychologist. Now as all these sports have grown, you have specialists for all these different things, and that's the reality. I think that it is very important that for horses' relevance and actually well-being overall in our world today, we have to have the horse in sport, because you look at different areas where the horse was vitally important in transportation and work, and in 95% of the world it is no longer relevant, is no longer used at all. And the last thing that we have where the horse is very relevant in our day-to-day life is sport. And if we lose that, the horse is not a dog. People are not going to take care of them in their backyard and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars caring for them and feeding them, and they're dangerous. And I think so. I think that it is very important that we understand that for the horse to stay relevant and cared for the way our sport horses are cared for, and the extension of that, the economy that's built from that, that goes out far beyond sport and cares for, wild horses, rescue horses, retired horses, is going to come from the economy of sport. So we do need to work with the horse. So there's a balance that has to be struck. If we think that we're going to take the horse out of sport and every person that owned horses is going to continue to spend these sums of money and have the skill set to care for these horses properly is going to happen, I think that's very naive. I was reading an article the other day. In New York City, at one point, there was up to 150,000 horses. And within 5 years of the CARB coming into New York City, all the horses were gone. I mean, those horses all didn't live a blissful existence, and all of the other horses that would have been cared for in a good and proper and responsible way didn't benefit from that change and that transition. So I always talk about that, the relevance of the horse in life, and yes, it has to work with us to some degree. There has to be an economy based around it, or else people just can't do it. For me, because I grew up in a barn, if I'm totally candid, I'm not a barn rat, so to speak. I'm not a horsey kid. But I have great respect for the horse in the fact that no matter whether the horse is good or bad, talented or not talented, if it's within my care, under our umbrella, I do expect the horse to always be cared for in a certain responsible way. And, with social media nowadays and people so concerned about how they look, they give the carrot when the camera's here, but they don't make sure the horse is fed at 7 a.m. when the sun comes up. So, for me, that's very important, that whether I am very fond of the horse or not particularly fond of the horse, or whether I have to work, ask a lot of the horse or I don't ask a lot of the horse, the basic needs and care of the horse must be met to a certain standard, or else you don't have the right to work with horses.
In 2017, you became world number one. Was being world number one was a goal in your career? Do you do everything you could to try and stay there as long as possible? We talk about that with Peter Fredriksen and with Henrik. And Peter told us that it was a goal, and after it was so hard to stay world number one. And Henrik, I think we will ask to Henrik this afternoon, but I think Henrik, it's a goal to stay world number one. How did you live towards that moment?
Of course it's a goal. Everybody would like to be number one in their chosen sport and profession. It was a nice box to check for me. I wasn't world number one for very long. Because it was never the priority goal. I think to stay number one, not only do you have to be incredibly successful at the highest level, of course, you have to compete more than I want to compete. It wasn't the right balance. It isn't the right balance for me to chase that. I always felt that if I could become world number one doing the sport in the way that I wish to do it on my terms, that was a great accomplishment. If I had to go to, 50 shows a year and jump, I think on average every month, most of the people in the top 10 with me have 20 to 30 more results than I have. So that's 20 to 30 more classes every cycle. Now the system doesn't, obviously is an average system, so it does reflect placings, right? It's not just you show more, you get more. But you're giving yourself more rolls of the dice, so to speak. And that's not how I wish to do the sport. I always like to go to the events that I enjoyed, compete the way I liked. I like to switch my horses around a lot, give them plenty of rest. I would say my horses probably, if you look statistically, show a little less than most people's. My top horses in particular. I think Azure, the last 2 years of her career, she jumped 6 Grand Prix each year. So yes, did I want to be world number one? Did I want to check that box? Would I certainly love to have probably a good enough horse, so to speak, to get back there, because you can do it in that way if you have a superstar horse that basically every time out wins the big event, which, when I was world number one, Azure was at the height of her career, and every time she showed, she basically won. That's a nice accolade. Is it the thing that I wake up in the morning and I'm working towards? No, I'd like to stay top 10, top 15, that I can go anywhere I want to go in the sport. But, winning the Aachen Grand Prix, winning Calgary, winning the Olympic gold medal, these are far, far higher on the list.
You said earlier that you have had setbacks and lows, and still, when we watch your show record, it feels like you have been on the top every season, every year, every championships. You haven't missed a selection almost. I'd like to know more about your system. How does it work? Because having the right horse to be selected in the team, to be placed at every Pan American Games, at every World Championships, Olympic Games, it takes a lot of work, but also it takes a system. So how is your system built so that you can last over season after season in the top sport?
Something I'm very quietly proud of, much more than world number one, is I think, other than when I had to withdraw for one Pan Am Games because the horse was injured right before, I think now we are 14 or 15 straight championships in a row in a mainstream country. Yeah. Or a top level country in the sport. You see sometimes some of the emerging nations, rider go 5 or 6 times, but that's a different scenario. And that's something I'm really proud of, and I think is a reflection on a few things. I think it's a reflection on actually a really well-structured system of how you're going to build to a championships. And it's something that I think is why we've also been able to mentor some riders now in the last decade who also have gone to championships. Adrian Sternlich, Lily Keenan, Lucy Delorier and Katie Dinan even a bit before that, and that was early on and she was younger. But now we have shown how we can take that system and have them incorporated into what they're doing with their own take on it. It doesn't have to be exact, but to take that structure and to put it in place, and with the right horses underneath them, which is key, and the right people around them, which is vital, be able to peak in the right moments. And that's something I'm incredibly proud of, and I spend a large amount of my time really working on. And I always work backwards from whatever that major goal is. Say it be the Olympic Games, for example. The Olympic Games in LA, I already have in my brain. I have a loose structure of how we're going to get there. I'm starting to think about how I'm going to not just have one horse possibly for that event, but also stack the deck where there are options. And then as you get to the World Championships in Aachen in 2 years, that's obviously a shorter time frame. That plan is more specific. And as it gets a shorter and shorter time frame, the plan gets more and more detailed, right? Looser, longer, more and more detailed. And then, again, first and foremost, you need to have the infrastructure to support all of this, right? I ride well. I'm a good rider, but there's 10 people here who are pulling all in the same direction to keep these horses healthy and fit and prepared, and to try to not only have them at their best, but to also cope with injuries and setbacks and things that aren't working. So you have all of that in place. So I would say that's probably the main reason for our success. And then, I've had, again, wonderful support from great sponsors who have stepped up when I've asked them to, and supported us with the purchase of horses, developing young horses, whatever it's needed to have the players underneath us, because the horse is a true athlete at the end of the day. And, you can be the greatest rider in the world and super organized, and if you don't have a good enough horse, you're average. That's how it is, at best. And frankly, flip side, you can have a brilliant horse and make a few mistakes and still win, So, yeah, I think that structure in place has been key. I think you have to start with the goal. I have the goal that we are going to go to the Olympic Games and we are going to win a medal. And no matter what those setbacks are that come along the way, I try not to get too deterred. And I have to say, Tokyo was a great example. Tokyo was an incredibly unique lead up. Obviously COVID hit, our sport continued, but the Olympics got pushed back a year. And I had, 2 riders at the time, both candidate, actually 3 riders. I had Lucy Delorier I was helping, who also works with her father, Lily Keenan and Adrian Sternlich, all vying for a spot on that team and all shortlisted. And basically we took the approach, we are going to be prepared for this date. And if it's canceled and that date moves, we are not going to feel sorry for ourselves. We are going to reassess our plan, and plan for whatever that next date is. And we took that through 2.5 years, that we were always prepared for whatever changed in that lead up. And I think that allowed us to all be, I was lucky enough to be on that team, or fortunate enough to be on that team, and the other 3 riders were all alternates for that team. So that was it was very difficult. It was a unique set of challenges and very rewarding.
Technically, how does it work to develop a horse that you just got for a championship, so for a goal? Like, what's the process? Do you have like a regular process? You just try to reach this milestone until you feel it's ready, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, there's not one set way, because all of the horses come to you in different moments and in different ways and with different backgrounds. Sapphire started riding when she was 7 years old. She developed over a 2-year period, went to her first Olympic Games in Athens as a 9-year-old, and ended up going to 2 Olympics and 2 World Championships, which was, incredibly unique in our sport. On the flip side, Ilix was 10 years old when I started to ride him. He had quite a bit of Grand Prix experience, and we felt was a horse that was ready to take the next step to championships level. And because he had been produced so well, I was able to move very quickly in the first few months of last year. And I had also, we were trying to layer our team a bit, because I had a horse called Callis, who's also been very successful as a candidate, but she had some age on her. And so we had to say, okay, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. How are we going to know that if something goes sideways, that we're not a one and done type situation here? So all of those things were considered. And you're kind of always plugging the holes of your boat, so to speak, making sure that you are looking forward to not only what you expect to happen, but obviously try to account for the unforeseen.
McLain, you're the most decorated American rider. You're also the face of this country, like Steve Gerda in Swiss or Roger Federer in tennis. Do you think it's your duty to be an ambassador for your sport, to advocate for important issues?
100%. And to be mentioned in that type of company of 2 athletes who I have unbelievable admiration for, not only as athletes but as human beings. And what I see, and when you mention people like Steve and Roger Federer, and I'm sure there are other athletes that I use as examples, Jack Nicklaus in golf, many other people I admire in different sports that I try to follow. These are people that I think tried their very best to adhere to a set of principles. Yes, there's success. Yes, there's money. But the set of principles about how they're going to try to play their game, how they're going to work with the people, and for us, the horses around them, how they're going to try to better themselves at every moment, and realize that not only what they're doing is about winning and losing and their own success, but it's a reflection of the career they've chosen, that you'd like to leave in a better place than you found it. And how are you going to inspire, right? Your legacy isn't about what you won necessarily. It's about how you're going to inspire the next group of people to come along and the fan base. And I think you see that common thread in people, in particular athletes, but also probably in business and in other walks of life. What inspires is not always the winning and losing, though that has to be a factor of it, for people to follow you and to be engaged in you, because people follow successful people. But it's, did you try to adhere yourself to a set of principles that are maybe bigger than you, bigger than the sport, and bigger than your success today?
So what would be these principles? What legacy would you like to leave on the equestrian sports and to the next generation coming? What message would you like to convey to the young riders who are aiming to become McLain Wards in the future, to have the same success as you have? And what responsibility also do you want to endorse for our sports and for the future of equestrianism and horse riding?
I think the first principle that we all try to live is, how do we treat our horses and the people around us? right? I mean, that's the basic of life. Like, how do you treat your circle? How do you try to help and encourage and support your circle? And we are limited, right? We can only do so much sometimes, and that can be frustrating. But if you get up every day and you have that idea that I want to work well and treat well the horses and the riders and the professionals around me, I want to do my art with as much excellence as possible. There's been a lot of social media back and forth. I believe there is good, correct riding, there is bad riding, and that negatively, bad riding and bad training negatively affects the horses and the people around us. So that's why it's important to try to follow the principles that are tried and true over many years as base, classical, good riding, good horsemanship, good way of working a horse. There is science behind technique. It isn't just that I feel a certain technique is better than a different technique. And there are people who have bad technique in any sport who reach success, but there is science and physics that prove that, running in a certain way makes you faster. Hitting a golf club in a certain way hits it further. Riding in a certain way is a better balance and freedom for the horse. So these are scientific principles that we should seek to do our art, which is our sport, better. So that's very important. And I think for myself, and as I've gotten later in my career, people talk a lot about legacy or what you would like to be remembered as doing. I would like to be remembered as somebody who did the sport well, who made plenty of mistakes and always tried to do better the next day. Never allowed those mistakes to define me. I've succeeded at that sometimes, and I've failed at it. But I will try harder tomorrow, I think that's very important in anything that you tackle in life.
There is a topic we talk a lot about the guests on this podcast is the way sports have developed over the last decade, let's say, maybe 2 decades, 15 years. So there's much more shows, but also much more money. There are many more riders, horses on the circuit themselves. What do you think of that? Do you think it's helping the sport? Do you think there's something we should be worried about or something we should be warning people in the industry, people in the federation about? How can we keep developing so fast and so far without harming eventually the essence of the sport?
It's a great question, and it's a multifaceted question and quite complicated. There are great benefits to growth, and there's always negatives, right? Not just in horse sports. What makes you acutely aware of it in horse sports is you're dealing with another living animal that we have an incredible responsibility to. And as our sport grows, and particularly grows, with what we say in English, the white elephant topics, more amateur riders, more money, more cost, more shows, right? These are topics that a little taboo. We need, again, to follow true, good professionals. That concept of professionalism, right? That isn't an economic concept. I see many young riders or professional riders who came up in very successful economic families, and the benefits of that. And they still have great desire to do things well, to work hard, right? So this isn't what defines it, but what defines it is do you adhere to the professional concepts, good horse care, good training, good riding, responsible showing. Our sport has become, I always say, use the analogy, a little bit of a ski resort, right? If there's snow, we're open, right? And if it works for your schedule, right? And the downside to that is there's a million people who either are unaware of, uneducated about, or just not exposed to the idea that the horse shouldn't show every time you're available to show. That's convenient for you. We have a growing number of trainers who don't have great experience, who don't have great knowledge, who have very little apprenticeship in their career, if any at all. And because we are an economically growing activity, they can get a good client and buy an expensive horse, but that doesn't mean they're good at what they do, or that it's good for the horse or the rider, to be honest. But they have gift of gab, and they say something, and you're great, and it's not your fault you crashed through the fence. Your horse is no good, or your trainer screwed up, or they sold you a bad horse. So that is always a challenge that we have to fight. And again, I always say adhering to good principles, classical riding, good training. Where did you learn? Gain education, do an apprenticeship, circle yourself with the best people. If we do that, not only do we grow as individuals, whether it be a client, an amateur, a professional, an owner, but also trainers grow. I mean, since the day I was born, I was fortunate enough to be around the best people in this industry, to see the good and the bad. And then I had to make choices for myself of how I wanted to do my own career and who I wanted to surround myself with. When you're not exposed to that and you don't choose to educate yourself in this way, it's difficult to be able to educate others. And it's funny, in any fast-growing industry, we see that happens, where we would not be allowed to practice medicine unless we had a certain amount of education. And even still, there's problems in bad doctors, right? So it's the same with anything, and there are negative effects to that, as you would say if there was someone who's not a good physician taking care of people, and we have to fight that with education and adhering to professional standards.
McLain, to have all these titles, to be so successful, you have to devote your whole life to sport, and that's what you've done, I think. Now you have 2 young kids and a daughter who ride. We saw that when you returned from Paris, you did your best to be there for her. Have you managed to find a balance between your sporting life, your professional rider life, and your personal life? Has it always been easy to find the right balance?
Finding the balance between the 2 lives for me has been easy because my wife and I aren't really seeking some balance that is unobtainable. We love this life. This is our life. We don't really want to do many other things. I mean, it's not that you don't take a break and you don't go enjoy some hobbies or whatnot, but we're not looking to find some abstract balance in our life. She loves the horses, she loves the game, she understands the life. I'm injured right now. I can't find anything to do. So I'm not. It's not that you don't get a little tired or a little burnt out or you look for a breath from time to time. Of course you do. That's natural. But when I hear people talk about this work-life balance, I'm not seeking a work-life balance. My work is my life and my life is my work. And I look at that as an incredible blessing. And, it's also when I hear people talk about retirement, that's like a 4-letter word to me. Like retirement, that's irrelevant, right? I want to stay relevant in my sport, whether I'm competing myself or mentoring other riders or doing business and selling horses, which I also enjoy, and putting horses and riders together. I'm not seeking or feeling like I'm missing some great balance in my life. I do have to, with my daughter starting to ride now, particularly my oldest is getting a little more serious. My younger one's still kind of goofing around. I'm hyper competitive. Obviously, I know enough, and I see the pitfalls. And trying to find that balance of giving her all of the opportunities, giving her the benefit from my experiences and my knowledge, but also not putting too much pressure on her, and also letting her find her own path and make her own mistakes. I think one of the things that was been so helpful years down the road, Lee and I, take care, Mike. Lee and I came up in the sport together, similar age, 2 young men. And we made a lot of mistakes, but we learned together. And now, since it's all worked out, which is always easier to say when it's all worked out, it was a great benefit, those trips and those missteps. And I've got to allow my kids also to have those missteps. And that's hard sometimes. I have to step away. But I'm lucky. I've got 2 great, smart young ladies. And I have a unicorn of a wife who doesn't make that a challenge, to be honest. We're living the dream,
McLain, we're approaching the end of the interview, and we like to talk about the journey, about challenges, about like philosophy of sport and riding, and the audience also asked us and challenged us to also integrate to the episodes a little bit of technique. So we have a few questions that will be a bit more technical, just for the people who will listen to be able to take something out of the interview. The first one is regarding walking the course, and we talked with Eric Navet at Geneva last month also about the way he prepared and helped Carl all over the Olympics to prepare, and I was very close to them when they were discussing the end of the warm-up, and they were talking about the way they walk the course. And I wanted to know, do you have tips like or method like Eric would do, like visualizing and having plan A, plan B, plan C, because I think Eric also have a plan Z in the way he walked the course. How do you walk a course to be able to be confident enough to enter the ring?
Okay, that's a multi answers. I am a huge subscriber to using sports psychology to make me a better athlete, a better thinker, and actually improve my life as a whole. So I started in 2008, and the reason I touch on that's a very long conversation, but and one I'm always open to share. But I had already, when I was seeking out real professional support in that area, I'd already won 2 gold medals. So one could say the career was going well, but I knew that the mental side of the game is something that I really felt I could improve. And I think you look in sport nowadays, and you're looking at how can in every area you push it to ultimate excellence, level of excellence. So visualization and all of these things I incorporate, not in a rigid way. For me, I have to feel where I'm at, what zone I'm in, how my brain's working, what distractions I have, and then apply it accordingly. And I think you have to, particularly if you're an analytical personality, which I am, you have to be careful not to overcomplicate things. Also, you can go too far. You can paralyze yourself with, complication and overthinking. But again, you do have to have a pattern. Because I don't think I was one of the most talented early on, naturally, I learned very quickly that I need to control all of the aspects and all the variables that I can control, because the horses are unique in the fact that there are so many parts of it that are out of your control. I mean, the normal variables, weather, conditions, footing, course, audience, noises. And now we're going to take a 1,200-pound animal who has a brain of its own and has its own experience, and we're going to ask it to do something that they don't fully understand, certainly the way we understand it, and work with us, right? So this is ripe for variables, right? So I always said, I'm going to control all of the things that I can control and do them to the best of my ability. I find comfort in that. I find in a pattern, right? So talking about walking the course, I find it shocking, people who are not diligent and very disciplined about their course walk. I want to know every option, look for everything that I can perceive visually, that the horse maybe could perceive, how things are going to play out. Maybe not options A through Z, but this, if he reacts this way, if he reacts that way, how am I going to accommodate that? And then also, particularly at the highest level, I should know how my horse is going to react to some degree to certain things, his weaknesses, his strengths, his fears, his confidence, right? And say, I know my horse is going to struggle with that, but that's not hard for my horse. That's knowing your partner. When I had a running joke with some of my German friends, they didn't walk the jump off, and I said, why didn't you walk the jump off? And they said, well, it's bad luck. I said, for me, not knowing the course is bad luck. Like, that's ridiculous, And now that's changed actually in the sport. This idea that you wouldn't possibly walk a jump off in the highest level is, it'd be gibberish. It's like being illiterate. So yeah, I try. Course walking is a great example of it, but I try to be incredibly disciplined about the things that I know I can control that 100%, because there's so many things that I'm not going to be able to have under my thumb like that.
What is your favorite gymnastic exercise at home?
Many. I mean, I love gymnastics. I was brought up as being a very important tool in the training of horses. I love, for years, 3 verticals in a row with a canter pole in the middle. We do feet in America, so 19 or 20 feet. I don't know what that is in meters, but a little bit of a short one stride. I've very rarely found a horse that doesn't benefit. It's just a nice exercise, gets the horse taking their time and using their technique to the best of their abilities. I like ground lines too. I train with ground lines, poles on the ground. I want the horse to always be learning and doing it on his own, but I don't like to trick or trap the horse.
What's the first thing you observe when you're trying a horse that you want to buy for the higher sport? The first thing you want to feel, the first thing you want to get.
In today's world, what is record is. It's funny, growing up, I had a huge, my first concern was the technique the horse had, the style. But as the sport's changed, our sport's gotten much more delicate, the speed has gotten much faster. I think the instinct of the horse to jump clean is huge. And I used to think if a horse jumped well, traditionally jumped in a classical style, but always had one down, with training, this could come better. But now I put great importance on seeing a horse that jumped clear rounds from early on, even if it's at a small level, even if it's a little bit in its own way, or the horse isn't beautifully schooled, that it have the instinct to jump clean. For me, that's a massive factor. And when I get on a horse, and if a horse has that instinct, I'm willing to give on a lot of the other areas. But I think when I try a horse, the rhythm of the canter, a horse has a good canter, is hugely important to me. And ideally, I'd love the horse to have a nice mouth and for the control. But like I said, if I think the horse has talent, I'll forgive those things a bit.
One more question, which is not so technical. Is there a particular horse that has marked your career?
That's hard to say because I've been, in different ways, they've all been pretty amazing, the top horses, Obviously, the first answer to that would have been Sapphire and Azure, right? I mean, these are two horses that were the very best in the sport, and I was blessed to have them and have them for a long time. The horse I was proudest of was Rothschild. It was a very unique, quirky horse that I probably would have given up on multiple times if it weren't for some of the people around me, including my father, who pressed me to keep believing in the horse. And we were able to accomplish some wonderful things. And actually, the horse really became my friend because I always have great respect for the horses, but I don't need to be the horse's best friend to have success. We're professionals. He's a professional. I'm a professional. But Rothschild really became my buddy. But, I'm grateful to them all. Callous and Contagious, given so much. Ilix, it was a short relationship, but we both had talent and we put it together. And there's some that the careers haven't been so successful, but I've learned a lot from. So I'm grateful to them all. And the best one's still to come, I'm sure.
McLain, what are your next challenges?
I need to get riding again quickly here before I power wash too many things. I think this year is not a championship year for us. I'd like to try to check off the Aachen Grand Prix off my list. That's our main focus for this season. Next year, World Championships in Aachen. It'll be my last World Championships in the cathedral of our sport. For me, a place that is like no other in the world. It's hallowed ground, we say. And one more Olympic Games on my home soil. I think if I could have some great results at these things, I'm ready to be behind the next generation.
Thank you so much, McLain, for your time.
No problem, guys.